Hello, Dr. Mark Andrew Holochak, and I'm a philosopher, historian, Thomas Jefferson scholar, and today I'd like to say something about the influence of Plato on Thomas Jefferson's political thinking, or the secondary title, Jefferson's Platonic Republicanism. Now, Thomas Jefferson was never shy about his execration of Plato. He wrote in an 1815 letter to John Adams that reading Plato's Republic with its whimsies, puerilities, and unintelligible jargon was, and I quote, the heaviest taskwork I ever went through. Now, that's not so astonishing, given that Jefferson would have had such an unsympathetic, perhaps even hostile view of Plato and his Republic, because Jefferson was a practical man, and one could argue that Plato was quixotic, at least in his Republic. Nonetheless, what's astonishing is that Jefferson could be so unsympathetic to a work that contains sentiments on morally sound government, I argue, that are remarkably similar to his own, both in substance and in sentiment. Now, there are at least four key respects in which Jeffersonian republicanism seems very much to follow the scheme of Plato in Republic. Overall, each has a moral vision for the state. Plato, his Republic; for Jefferson, his republicanism, and the possibility of each bringing into existence his ideal depends on four factors: full participation by all members of the state, a certain structure or scheme to be put into place that guarantees that each state is optimally virtuous, the governance of the most important affairs by the worthiest and best citizens, and an innovative and elaborate system of education to ensure the success of the political structure. Now, the first commonality is full political participation on behalf of all members of the political community. When all citizens fulfill their duties to their fullest capacity, the state survives. When the state thrives, each citizen will thrive or nearly so. For Plato, full participation requires that the polis itself has self-control, in Greek sophrosini, a certain sort of mastery over pleasures and desire. And self-control comes through the recognition that all persons, and here we have Plato's laborers as guardians and complete guardians or rulers, must subordinate their wants and do what they can for the good of the polis. Guardians must protect and rule. Laborers must agree to be protected and ruled. In that sense, self-control, property of both person and their polis, is a sort of harmony. Writes Socrates, says Socrates, is there any greater evil we can mention for a city than that which tears it apart and makes it many instead of one, or any greater good than that which binds it together and makes it one? For Jefferson, in contrast, full participation requires that every citizen has some degree of participation in governmental affairs. The many at the level of wards, the better in the schools, in the higher levels of government, and in employment that lends itself readily toward human progress. Jefferson says, every man must be a sharer in the direction of his ward republic or of some of the higher ones. Every man must be a participator in the government of affairs, not merely at an election one day in the year, but every day. In other words, full participation requires that every male citizen be educated at some minimal level, the amount and degree of education being commensurate with the extent of each person's political participation and each person's needs. The second commonality is that a well-running state must have a certain order or structure. Once structured, it must be run in a manner that allows for integrity of its structure. Viz, it must continue to function in a politically responsible and morally sensitive manner. That structure need not imply any particular sort of constitution. For Plato, there are five sorts of personality types which are divided neatly into laborers and guardians, and only the guardians class, from which the rulers or complete guardians emerge, are educated. Though each group has its role, and each of those roles is critical, the role of the highest class, the rulers, is most important in allowing for even the possibility of any degree of functional unity in a republic, once the republic is established. Thus, for Plato, justice is system-driven, and all persons play an important role, but the system is secured from the top down. That is because of the virtue of the rulers guaranteed by their pedigree and education. The system guarantees that there'll be virtuous persons, and virtuous persons ensure the virtue of the polis. For Jefferson, there are the laboring, in other words, the husbandmen, the merchants, and so forth, and the learned, the educators and politicians. The division is not decided by birth or wealth, but by the rise of character and talent through perseverance, labor, and opportunity. Like Plato's Republic, justice is system-driven, in that Jefferson advises that there be 4 tiers of government. And he proposes educational reform to prompt political participation and to function as a check on political corruption. Thus, unlike Plato's Republic, the structure is secured principally from the bottom up. It is the citizens' education and participation at the level of ward governments, the smallest level of governments, that offers a stringent check on the ambitions and wants of those governing and excludes from offices greedy plutocrats and tyrants. The third commonality is that a state runs best when the best persons govern. For Plato, a healthy republic is possible only on condition that there be at least one fully virtuous person, though typically there will be many, who consents to subordinate his happiness for the good of the state and thus to rule. That person, one whose soul is ordered, organized, and divine because of the order, organization, and divinity of the objects of his study, will be a king that is a philosopher, and a philosopher that is a king. Says Socrates, no city, constitution, or individual man will ever become perfect until either some chance event compels those few philosophers who are vicious to take charge of a city, whether they want to or not, and compels the city to obey them, or until a god inspires the present rulers and kings or their offspring with a true erotic love of true philosophy. And so the structure of Plato's Republic, with its unique educational system, is put into place to ensure that the best persons, the edistoi in Greek, both men and women, are in a position to govern. For Jefferson, 4 tiers of government, wards, counties, states, and the nation will be in place so that everyone has some participatory role in governing, and that the morally superior, the natural aristocracy, again, the edistoi, Jefferson uses the same word, will most likely be encouraged to govern at the higher levels. Jefferson writes, the natural aristocracy I consider as the most precious gift of nature for the instruction, the trust, and the government of society, and indeed it would have been inconsistent in creation to have formed man for the social state and not to have provided virtue and wisdom enough to manage the concerns of society. He goes on to say, may we not even say that that form of government is the best which provides the most effectually for a pure selection of the natural edistoi into the offices of government? Thus, the way to ensure that the naturally best and not the artificially best rule is to leave the election of governors in the hands of the people, a people suitably educated. And the final commonality concerns the need of an elaborate systemic approach to education. For Plato, education is reserved for the guardians only and consists of a few years of physical training and harmonics. For those guardians that show that they possess higher capacities, there are many years of mathematical training, 15 years of practical training and ruling, and 5 years of training in dialectic. The education of rulers ends at the age of 50 when they are ready to rule. I quote from Plato. At the age of 50, those who've survived the tests and been successful both in practical matters and in the sciences must be led to the goal and compelled to lift up the radiant light of their souls to what itself provides light for everything, in a tenebrous vision of the form of the good. He continues, that is Socrates. Then they must each in turn put the city, its citizens, and themselves in order, using it, i.e. the good, as their model. Overall, the education of the clique guardians is thorough and rigorous. It aims to teach love of toil, truth, self-control, and greatness of soul, Greek megalopsychia. For Jefferson, education conforms to the needs of each citizen. He writes to nephew Peter Carr, it is highly interesting to our country, and it is the duty of its functionaries to provide that every citizen in it should receive an education proportioned to the conditions and pursuits of his life. Now there is ward schooling for the many, college schooling for them with greater promise, and university schooling for those persons, for instance, who will be politicians and professors. As with Plato, Jefferson's elaborate system of education had two aims principally in mind: the development of civic virtue and intelligence, and obedience to just government. Now, there are obvious disanalogies, of which space prohibits inarticulation. Those notwithstanding, there seemed to be little reason to believe that key features of Plato's ideal republic in Republic, his book, were incorporated in Jefferson's own vision of thriving republicanism.